Welcome to our second Justice Center Summit presentation on abuse prevention resources. So without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Kim Wadsworth to begin our presentation.
Great, thank you, Devin. I am just going to share my screen so I can get the PowerPoint up here. There we are. Good afternoon. And thank you for attending Abuse Prevention Resources. My name is Kim Wadsworth, and I am with the training unit here at the Justice Center, and I am going to let my fabulous colleague and co-trainer today introduce herself.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is also Kim, so you guys clearly all picked the right presentation to go to. You only have to remember one name here, so good job there. I've been with the Justice Center since we opened. I'm really excited to talk to you today about our abuse prevention resources that we've developed over the last several years here at the Justice Center and present with Kim today. So with that being said, I'll turn it back over to Kim to get us started.
Thank you, Kim. Before we get into our agenda and exactly what we're going to be covering today, we want to ask you a question. So when you hear the words Justice Center, what's the first thing that pops in your head? And you can put it right in the chat. So I say Justice Center, you think what? And you can put that right in the chat. Protection, justice, investigation, safety, oversight, incident reporting, someone wrote trouble, law enforcement, accountability, oversight, quality, protection, safety of patients. Yes, we like to add this question at the beginning of our presentations just to kind of see your initial thoughts when we say the Justice Center. Today, what we're going to be talking about are the proactive things the Justice Center does. So Kim and I would love, whoops, let me just minimize that. Kim and I would love to, when we hear those comments coming in, say things like you prevent abuse, you support direct support professionals, you have recorded trainings on your website. So we're hoping to give you a proactive side of the Justice Center and maybe share some resources that you're not familiar with. So we're going to go over some prevention resources. I'm actually going to give you a tour of our website. And then Kim is going to go over two prevention toolkits, one on developing corrective action plans, and the other one is best practices for responding to medical emergencies. And these are two of our latest and greatest toolkits that Kim will be reviewing. And then we're going to be ending with professional boundaries overview. We're going to be talking about what are professional boundaries and why they are important, and then leave you with some professional boundaries resources. So I'm going to share my screen. Kim, you can see this, correct? Excellent. So if you have not been to the Justice Center website, we really encourage you to go to the website. We have a ton of valuable information and resources and trainings. So it's justicecenter.ny.gov, and you see advocacy and support at the top, providers and agencies, and prevent abuse. I'm going to click on prevent abuse and give you a little tour of what you can see on this page. So the first thing here is a prevention video. It's with our executive director, Denise Miranda. And she talks about ways the Justice Center prevents abuse and neglect. So the spotlight on prevention is really where I want to spend the majority of our time together. So these agency self-assessments, we scroll down here. This is a self-assessment tool. It is not mandated by the Justice Center. Agencies can use it at their discretion. It is an assessment that you can complete at your agency that is going to give you some insight into areas of risk associated with potential abuse and neglect. So we have one for OPWDD, one for OMH, one for Office of Children and Family Services, one for Office of Addiction Services, the State Education Department. So I'm just going to click on the top one on OPWDD, just so you can take a look and a peek to see what is included in that. So there are 8 risk factors The first one is abuse prevention policy. The first question is, or the statement is, the facility or program has an abuse prevention policy, and it goes through some factors that are involved in that. Another risk factor is staff training. The first one says, orientation for new staff includes information on how to recognize and report abuse and neglect. Another section is staff screening. We have one on staff stress or burnout, staff ratio and turnover. Another risk is history of deficiencies or complaints. Risk factor number 7 has to do with the culture or management of an agency. And the last risk factor is physical environment. So agencies can take this, do it at their own leisure. It is not mandated. It is not reported to us by any means. It's just a self-assessment tool for you to do at your discretion. I'm going to flip back. Just going to move this over here. The second section I want to bring you to is best practices for an abuse-free environment. So these kind of correlate with the self-assessment that I just showed you. One is create a comprehensive abuse prevention policy. The second one deals with effective and timely staff training, screen new hires thoroughly. So all of these 11 items are going to be found in this PDF right here. So we put it in a nice PDF in case you want to print it. And they just offer some suggestions. So create a comprehensive abuse prevention policy. If you do not have one, it suggests form a work group of stakeholders. It gives suggestions on how to provide effective and timely staff training, how to screen new hires thoroughly. And then if you do not have an abuse prevention policy at your agency, we have a sample one here. Again, it's just a sample. You can use this as a guide and modify it to meet your needs, but we do have a sample policy on our website for you to take a look at. So I'm going to go back. And then the code of conduct. So the first thing under the code of conduct is we have the acknowledgement form. That is going to list the provisions and the place for you to sign upon hire and on an annual basis. We also have, if you click on the training page, we have a code of conduct train the trainer. The March session has been filled, but we do have room in the April and May. So if you're interested in attending the Code of Conduct Train the Trainer session, we have one on April 14th in the morning, and then again on May 17th. We will be co-training this with National Alliance of Direct Support Professionals. What we do during that training is we go through the provisions, and then we have breakout groups, and we talk about how to bring the Code of Conduct provisions alive into your agency. So when you leave, you have a better understanding of how to teach this back at your agency. And we also send you a facilitator guide, so all the notes are in there as well. We also have, if you are not aware of, we offer an annual Code of Conduct award. Anyone who signs the Code of Conduct is eligible. Who can submit a nomination? Anyone can. You can self-nominate. You can nominate your colleague, your supervisor. We are really looking for someone that exemplifies the Code of Conduct and uses it on a daily basis to make decisions and to use it to have discussions around what is the best interest in the person receiving services. The online form is right here. You can click on that button, and we'll be accepting nominations through July 1st. After we receive all the nominations, our advisory council will review them and nominate winners, and then we're going to have a ceremony, an online ceremony in the fall for those individuals that were selected to win that award. So if you have not been to our website, we really encourage you to do that. And another thing you can put on your to-do list is think of someone that you really want to nominate for this award. I'm sure everyone out there can think of at least one person who they work for that really goes above and beyond. So we really hope that you would fill that out, and we're excited to read your nominations. So then if we go down here, we have toolkits. As you can see, we have some listed here. Kim is going to review 2 of our latest and greatest. One that she is going to be talking about is correct and action plan guidance, and that is right here. What I want to show you right here is our professional boundaries training course. So here's the course, and I'm going to click on it. It's interactive, but I wanted to scroll down and show you that we have facilitator guides depending on the agency that you're with. So we have a facilitator guide for addiction services, children and family services, developmental disability services, mental health, and then we also have that coupled with guides for participants. So the intent of the online training course is to do it in a group of people, and as the facilitator, you can pause the training, you can ask questions, you can have a dialogue, and that facilitator guide is going to give you all the information and notes that you're going to need, and it also suggests when you can pause that training and have a discussion and ask further questions. And I'm going to bring up the PowerPoint again. And hopefully if you haven't been on our website, that kind of gave you an overview of our prevention resources. We really encourage you to go on our website. We really take a lot of thought and effort to think of trainings that would be beneficial and resources and guidance for you. So now I'm going to turn it over to Kim Affinati.
Before you do, I just want to, there's a couple of questions that have come in. I just wanted to ask them real quickly. One is, what can providers do to help staff feel that the Justice Center isn't so bad and out to get them? Do you have any suggestions?
Sure. If you are doing what, as a direct support professional, what you're supposed to be doing on a daily basis, that is following your code of ethics and following the code of conduct, and really putting the person that you're supporting their best interests, and you are documenting things that you have been doing or have not been doing in support of the individual, you're going to be okay. We are really looking for that small percentage of people that really abuse and neglect individuals, and if you come to work every day and put forth your best effort, you're going to be okay. We're not looking to get people in trouble who are not doing anything that allows them to get in trouble.
Thank you, Kim. And there was another question that really isn't necessarily about your prevention presentation, but it was a holdover from this morning. So this person would like an answer, and so I'll take the answer for it too. But the question is, what happens, as often does, when staff work at more than one provider agency, and say at another agency, the staff person is the subject of an allegation of abuse and neglect, and maybe the provider agency where they're working puts them out on administrative leave due to the allegation or the agency policies. The question is, does the Justice Center let the other provider agency know about, that investigation that's going on? And the answer is that we do not talk to other provider agencies about investigations that are ongoing. There's very strict laws about confidentiality and what we can share. As I shared this morning, if someone is substantiated for the most serious level of abuse, a Category 1 finding, which puts them on the staff exclusion list, we do notify provider agencies that have done background checks on that staff person so that they're aware that the person is on the staff exclusion list. I would say for other, that's a very small percentage of those of the allegations that we receive that end up being a category 1 put on the staff exclusion list. For other things, I would suggest that, provider agencies have as part of your policies, if somebody is working at another agency, that they need to disclose that to you, that they need to disclose if they're the subject of an investigation and what it is, so that you can use your professional judgment about what to do with those staff people. And there was just one other question that came in, if there was an order form for resources on the Justice Center. I can't remember if it's on our website, but there is contact information, and there's a general number that you can always call the Justice Center and say, you're looking for so many posters or something, and we will get those to you. So that's it for right now. Sorry.
Thanks, Devin.
All right, so let's talk about the corrective action plan guidance that we developed and published to our website back in December. So we're going to start with a poll. And what we want to know is, tell us, do you currently have a role in developing corrective action plans at your agency? Just a simple yes or no answer here.
It's a very hard question you're asking, Kim.
So many choices. We'll just give it another minute and then we can bring up the results. Jean, did you want to bring up the results for us? Okay, great. So it looks like we've got about 65% of people have answered yes, that they do have a role currently in developing corrective action plans, which is great. We're excited that you're still joining us today to hear about the corrective action plan guidance that we have out. And we're hoping that for the people who replied no, if you are working in a program, we do want you to, by the end of this part of the presentation, understand that everybody who works in a program really has an integral role in implementing, developing effective corrective action plans. So with that, let's jump right into the spotlight. So you can go ahead, Kim, advance. Thank you. Okay, so this is just a list of the different resources that are found within this toolkit. We have an introduction, an FAQ page, corrective action plan checklist. And to rewind for a second, I should have said, you're going to hear the term corrective action plan also be referred to as a CAP. So I'm going to use those interchangeably. Also, the term state oversight agency, it refers to a state agency that's responsible for licensing or certifying the programs that we oversee. We also call that an SOA. So if I do get caught up in my acronym world, that's what those two mean, just to give you some clarification there. So to go back to what we have in the toolkit here, a reference guide on documentation to support implementation of CAPs. We have case studies, and we have resources for success. So really what prompted the creation of this toolkit was back in 2013, when we were first opening, we were tasked with monitoring the actions the agencies were taking in response to abuse and neglect cases. So how we do that right now is by completing audits of corrective action plans that are put in place after abuse and neglect incidents. And we're always looking for ways that we at the Justice Center can improve our processes, as well as the best ways for us to be making recommendations for the providers. So we do these audits by reviewing the corrective action plans that are submitted to state oversight agencies, as well as agency documentation and any other pieces of relevant information and documentation that's available to us. And we identify an issue, we take a look at what the provider said they were going to do, we make an assessment, and so we include some information about the conclusion we've reached, and then we oftentimes will also offer some recommendations. We do that by using a CAP audit findings letter, so you would receive formal notification. One of the things that we've noticed over the last couple of years from doing this work is oftentimes we get a lot of the same questions. Why is my CAP insufficient? What do I need to do in order to get, a positive findings letter from the Justice Center regarding my corrective action plan? And so, part of the goal for putting together this guidance is so that we're giving you those tools to let you know this is what an effective timely cap looks like, and these are the things that you should be maintaining, so that when we're asking you for those things, you're able to produce them, and then we're able to reflect that in our cap audit findings letter. So you can go to the next slide. We're going to first talk about what's first available in the toolkit, and that's the introduction. We really, on this page, we really wanted to be as transparent as possible. It includes definitions of a corrective action plan and also what a corrective action plan audit is. Over the last several years, our process has really evolved, and more recently, we really have tried to move away from that gotcha mindset to more of working to be seen as partners in prevention. So we do that by, again, explaining our process here in detail. We also thought it was important to include in this toolkit what happens during a site visit, what to expect during an audit. We understand that when the Justice Center comes on site, that can be scary for staff. That can even, be nerve-wracking for the people that are receiving services. So we're trying to be as transparent as we can be to let you know what to expect, to kind of make it a little bit easier for when we are coming on site. So our audit process, actually you can go back for a second if you don't mind, thank you. So our audit process includes working with the provider agencies to request documentation that will help support implementation of the corrective actions that have been put forth. This is done by our staff contacting the provider and requesting information. Sometimes we will also go on site, like I mentioned, which is why we thought it was important to include the site visit process. And that's for work that can't be done from our desk. The best example of that is when a case involves some environmental issues. We can't see that from our desk. We can't see that through paperwork. So we oftentimes will have to go on site to take a look at things and really get, our own eyes on the program. So we do try to give agencies every opportunity that we can to clarify any inconsistencies or discrepancies in documentation. So there is a lot of back and forth that occurs, but it's really so that we have a full understanding before we issue our findings letter as to, what happened, and we can fully speak to the implementation of the corrective actions. The next thing that we have in this toolkit is a frequently asked questions document. This was developed with suggestions and feedback from our staff at the Justice Center, who are often fielding these questions from provider agencies or other stakeholders, as well as through feedback that we received from an internal abuse prevention committee that we have, where they also let us know some of the questions that they had been hearing. Some of the questions that are on here include things like, when is my cap due? What do I do if a case is unsubstantiated? Do I still need to submit a corrective action plan? What do I do if there's no issues listed in the investigation report? Termination, is that a corrective action? That's something that we hear pretty often. If there's an appeal, how does developing a cap play into that? And some clarification regarding the administrative action reporting process versus the corrective action planning process. So like I said, these are just questions that we've heard during our audit process, as well as other stakeholders who had received similar questions. So it's really just to outline some responses to those types of questions. One of the things that we really wanted to do with this toolkit was to not just provide information, but to also give helpful tools that providers can actually use. So this was developed as a checklist of steps that you can take from the time an incident happens through CAP implementation. And so this document is going to walk through different steps at any point in the life cycle of an incident to make sure that you're doing the things that should be happening, as well as making sure that you're maintaining the documentation to give yourselves the credit to show the things that you've been doing. So we also developed this from conversations that we had with our SOA partners in prevention. We do work very closely with them. So we wanted to make sure that we were all on the same page here in terms of expectations following an incident. One of the things, for instance, that we wanted to point out is, a lot of the time agencies something bad happens, and agencies jump right on to, we've got to retrain staff. Staff needs to be retrained on this. One of the things that we see during our audit process is that while daytime staff are trained, evening staff are trained, staff working those non-traditional hours like overnight staff or per diem staff, they're harder to train, right? Because, we're not there during the overnight shift. We're not there when the per diem staff comes in for their, first shift in 3 months. And so it's really, this checklist provides that reminder that, overnight staff, those staff working those non-traditional hours still need to be trained. So that's just one example of one of the things that you can find within this, this resource in the toolkit. Another tool that we're hoping, in my head, I envision it, I go on site somewhere and someone's going to have this lovely reference guide hanging up at their desk, and it's going to be referenced when they're developing their corrective action plans and thinking about what documentation they need to keep. So this is a quick reference guide that will outline just that. So on the left-hand column, we have the corrective action type, and so that's going to be things like personnel, training, physical plant or environmental corrections, any corrections to services or treatment, person's rights, etc. So we outlined the type of corrective action, and then the column to the right outlines the type of documentation that we would expect agencies to maintain, complete, and submit to us. So again, when we're taking a look at auditing a corrective action plan and we find out that your agency has developed a new policy on incident management, for example, we're going to be taking a look at, we would expect that you would have completed training with staff on that, right? So we're going to want to take a look at that revised policy. We're going to want to take a look at a master staff roster so we get an understanding of who should have been in that training. And then we're going to take a look at attendance sheets. We want to see that your staff were trained. And so this document really helps to outline the types of things that when we're completing audits, we're going to be asking for. A lot of the time, and I think a lot of people can attest to this, if we don't write it down, did it happen? And I can't, stress enough the importance of making sure that you're documenting things, not just so that when we come there, we can have access to it, but also to give yourselves credit. There's so much good work going on out there. And, if you're not giving yourselves enough credit if you're not documenting those things. So again, really hoping that this will be a tool that agencies can use in that respect.
Kim, someone asked in the chat where they can find this. So if you go to the Justice Center website, which is justicecenter.ny.gov, you can click on Prevent Abuse, and then you can scroll down and find this.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Kim. I just wanted to because there was another question in there, and then do a clarifying thing. Everything that we're going to talk about here, you can find on our website. So, and it'll be included when we send it to you. Can somebody ask a question? If you're requiring staff rosters for all CAPs requiring training, would that be a best practice for an agency?
Yes. So all of the state oversight agencies gave us some feedback about what they expect to see uploaded either to their reporting system or submitted along with their corrective action plans. And it certainly is a best practice to submit that master staff roster with your corrective action plan. That also reduces the back and forth between either your state oversight agency and the provider or us and the provider when we're completing the audit.
Thank you. And then one last thing I just want to clarify for people in this session. I've seen a couple of questions that are really more specific about our investigative process, what the findings mean, and even a couple about doing some pre-employment checks. Kim are here to talk about prevention. We have a session tomorrow on Justice Center processes that goes into great detail about outcomes of investigations and what that means. And we have a session next week on background checks that you can also attend. And bonus, all of this information can be found on our website as well. We provide information about what to expect during a Justice Center investigation and what the outcomes are as well. So there you go. I'm out.
Thanks, Devin.
Thank you. So the next thing, and you'll find this in all of our toolkits, we have case studies or could this happen in your program scenarios. And these are scenarios that are based loosely on incidents that were reported to the Justice Center. In this specific toolkit, it includes a narrative of the incident, and then we break down some discussion points. So for these, we have where are the issues of concern, where are the areas in need of corrective action, and what type of documentation should we keep to support implementation. I'm going to read the example on the next slide, and the next slide will outline it here so that you have a quick reference to it. But as I read this, I want you to be thinking about what went wrong here, what could have been done better. And after I'm done reading it, I'm just going to ask that everyone use the chat to type in any initial thoughts that they have on what went wrong here. So Theo is a youth receiving services. He told the manager of his residential center that Donnie, a direct support professional, punched him in the face during a physical restraint. The manager asked Donnie, who's the staff, what happened, and while Donnie denied punching Theo, Donnie was still moved to another unit at the facility away from Theo. No other safeguards were put in place, and this allegation was not reported to anyone else. 2 nights later, during a physical restraint with another youth, a staff person observed Donnie slap the youth in the side of the face. Donnie was then placed on leave and eventually terminated from the program. So if you can use the chat function to think about what went wrong here, where are some opportunities for improvement, just based on that very brief narrative. Okay, great. We're seeing things about incident reporting, removing staff. See a lot about incident reporting. Good. No pictures, no emotional support. Good, good, good. So it looks like you guys have a good handle on what was missed here. So we provide this example, along with a couple of other examples in this toolkit, so that these can be things that are used during onboarding with staff. These can be used during staff meetings to just review and to talk about as a discussion with your staff about where things could go wrong, where there's opportunities for improvement. And then the last thing for this toolkit is resources for success. So we did receive these from our SOA partners. And these are just resources that you can reference that are specific to CAP development from the various state oversight agencies. If you pull up the Spotlight on Prevention Toolkit live, you can actually click on these. So these are all live links. Okay, so I don't know if we need to take any questions, Davin, before we jump into the other spotlight.
I've not received any questions. Jen answered the one about, forms. We don't have special forms that we require anyone to sign for training.
Okay, perfect, thank you. So now we're going to talk about another toolkit. You'll notice that the layout of it is very similar to what I just went through. So we're going to stay on this topic of Justice Center Spotlight on Prevention Toolkits, but we're going to pivot in a different direction and now discuss best practices for responding to medical emergencies. This toolkit was developed in response to many cases involving a poorly responded to incident that had fatal or near fatal outcomes. And we wanted to offer recommendations that would really help agency staff be best prepared for these types of situations. So what you're seeing there is the cover of this toolkit. And these are some of the things that you'll find within this toolkit. We have an introduction page, again, that includes brief background of the topic. And then we have different sections: preparing for medical emergencies, staff actions, best practices related to policies, environment, and training, which we're going to talk a little bit more in depth about. Again, those case scenarios. And then we have 2 things that we're excited to talk with you about: a COM chart and a sample pain picture. Again, these are, in my head, I'm envisioning these things are going to get tacked up on a wall somewhere for staff to be able to reference. So the first thing is preparing for medical emergencies. And one of the first ways an agency can help prepare staff for responding to medical emergencies is making sure staff know what a medical emergency truly looks like that would require immediate medical intervention. One thing you're going to notice throughout this whole toolkit is guidance to agencies to make sure that they're including direction to staff to call 911 immediately. We want to see in agency policies that staff are supported in making that decision. It's mentioned several times throughout the toolkit. We even got real, kitschy with it and said, don't delay, call right away. Don't stall, make the call, whatever helps people remember that it's really important to make that phone call is really what we wanted to drive home here. We know, in terms of medical emergencies, every second can really be critical. Making sure that people are getting a timely response from emergency personnel is really important. Providing staff with a list of conditions, such as those listed in this part of the document, can help guide staff on what to look for and consider for emergency assistance. So these are things like head trauma, overdose, chest pain, those sorts of things. And we're going to talk a little bit about the best practices related to in 3 different areas. So we're talking policies, environment, and training. So if we start with policies here, I know you'll be surprised to hear that we mentioned to first call 911. Like I just said, we're really trying to drive that point home, that calling 911 is critical. For those of you who are in the morning session, you heard from Deputy Chief Salerno about cases where there was a delay in contacting 911, which led to a delay in care. And again, unfortunately, not so positive outcomes. Drawing on that, we really wanted to drive that point home. Having policies that, again, support that staff person's decision to contact 911 before anyone else. Call them before you worry about staffing issues. Call 911 before you worry about contacting a family member, for instance. Those few seconds can be crucial in getting necessary medical care. Another best practice we see and recommend be implemented in agency policies is to outline training requirements for staff. And specifically in this case, we mean those training requirements that could mean providing life-saving measures, things like CPR, first aid, Narcan administration, those types of things that really can speak to preparing staff to handle medical emergencies. And then a third best practice that we identify is identifying time frame to make sure your policies identify time frames for on-call supports to call back. So, staff might be identifying something doesn't require immediate medical intervention, but they do have a question. They want to get some guidance on how an individual is presenting and what they should do about it. Having it outlined in an agency policy that you have to receive a call back within, X time frame. And if you don't receive a call back within X time frame, you need to elevate the concerns to either, 911 or someone else at the agency. Having that outlined in a policy is really helpful for staff. So again, we want to make sure staff feel empowered to contact emergency services if they don't get a response. And again, having that written in a policy is very helpful. Next, we talk about the best practices for the environment. Later on, I'm going to give you an actual example of the hierarchy of needs guide. But the hierarchy of needs is basically something that's going to break down, here's what I'm seeing, and should this be a call to 911? Should this be a trip to the emergency room or urgent care? Or can this wait? And can this just be a call to the RN or a physician? So the main goal of this is to provide staff with an easily accessible reference, which is why it's in the environment section, because this is something that we would expect could be hung up in areas that are frequented by staff so that they can reference it if needed. Some other considerations for best practices related to the environment are placing things like breathing masks, crash carts, etc., in an easily accessible space. And the same goes for Narcan. If you're not familiar with Narcan, it's a life-saving drug that can reverse the effects of an opioid overdose. And we can't stress the importance enough of making this drug available to staff and people in care. Over the years, we have seen one of our state oversight agency partners, the Office of Addiction Services and Support, put out some guidance that basically says you should have Narcan available, make it available to everybody. It really makes a big difference in terms of making sure people have a second chance really at life after they've potentially overdosed. And then the last thing we wanted to mention related to best practices for the environment is the use of a grab and go binder. So grab and go binders can be created upon admission to a program and should include emergency contact information, diagnoses, any medications, allergies, other pertinent health information that can be provided to emergency personnel when they arrive on site for quick reference. So the use of grab and go binders can help ensure that they receive all the information that they need about a person receiving services. Because we know in terms of a medical emergency, my first thought might not be to tell somebody that this person is allergic to latex, because I'm just, I'm trying to process what's going on and trying to make sure they get assistance. But that could be a really important thing that if it's not told could have some poor outcomes. So this grab and go binder would help ensure that all that important information is provided to emergency personnel. And then the best practices in terms of training. So, the first thing we mention here is conducting mock drills. We say that because, again, no matter how prepared you think you are for an emergency, you really can't truly predict how you're going to act. We, a couple of years ago, were on site at an agency that really practiced having conducting mock drills with all levels of their staff. This included administration from their central office building. It included direct care staff. It included security. And they all played a critical role in the mock drill. And then they also all were able to give feedback on how things went. They gave realistic feedback. It wasn't just, hey, I really think you did a great job. It was, I think you did a great job. And next time, grab the grab and go binder first, for instance. So practicing those mock drills and doing it using realistic situations and providing that timely feedback can really be a vital tool to help prepare staff. As we mentioned in the policy section, ensuring staff are trained in CPR, first aid, Narcan administration upon hire, and then they're getting those refresher trainings as needed is also really important to make sure staff are equipped with the skills needed to intervene in an emergency. When it comes to training staff on fall protocols, the thing we really wanted to drive home here was the importance of training staff on not moving people after someone falls. This is something, for example, that could be incorporated into mock drills for extra reinforcement. So you could always plan a mock drill if fall risks are an issue at your agency. You could plan a mock drill around somebody falling and see how staff are able to respond to that. And then lastly, we wanted to talk a little bit about the importance of providing in-person interactive training, which is funny since we're here in a virtual world right now providing this overview. We do know that, especially over the last couple of years, there's been a lot of factors that have contributed to training modalities and the ability to offer in-person trainings. But to the extent possible, providing those in-person interactive trainings does allow for participants to ask questions. And as trainers, it allows for you to see how engaged staff are in that training. So it does allow for more interaction, more live questions, more feedback. So now to jump into, again, one of these, could this happen in your programs? You can just go to the next slide, Kim. Thank you. So again, I'm going to read this, and same thing as last time, if you can be thinking about what went wrong here. So James was complaining of stomach pain and pointing to his stomach. James's blood pressure was regularly monitored. Laureen, a direct care staff, took his blood pressure and noted it was high. She called the RN about James's blood pressure, but did not tell the RN that James was also complaining of stomach pain. The RN directed Lorraine to bring James to the emergency department. Instead of immediately taking him there, Lorraine waited for her coworker to return from an outing. She gave James a shower and shave and changed him into clean clothing while they waited. When the other staff returned, Lorraine took James outside to hail a taxi. While doing so, James collapsed on the sidewalk. Lorraine called her supervisor to tell him that James had collapsed. Some bystanders administered CPR to James while Lorraine was on the phone. So what happened here? If you can use the chat function to talk about some of the issues, that would be great. So we're seeing things like should have called 911, inaccurate reporting to the RN, not taking him to the ER immediately, delay in care, poor communication. Yes. So you guys are hitting the nail there. Perfect. Not taking a cab, for instance. That's a great one. Okay, so very similar to the previous one, you know, we really give you these scenarios so that you're able to use them as training opportunities during staff meetings, onboarding, orientation, that kind of thing, to talk to people about how to handle these kinds of situations. The next two slides are going to be tools. This slide and the next one are going to be tools that we developed that we hope you'll use as reference guides in your agencies. The first is the COM chart. The idea behind this is to establish a coordinated response to a medical emergency by assigning staff various roles. We've identified 4 distinct roles for staff and encourage staff to be assigned a role upon beginning their shift. So what do we mean here? We have the C. The C is for communicator. This person is responsible for meeting emergency personnel upon arrival to the program and sharing important information about the situation. They're going to be the ones to grab that grab and go binder, give it to EMS, and make any other necessary notifications about the situation. So after you've contacted EMS, we would expect the communicator to call a supervisor if they haven't already and let them know that this is going on, for instance. The A we're referring to as the assistant. The assistant's going to help the leader, who we'll talk about next, to keep the person in crisis safe. And they will also be the person that will bring any emergency and first aid supplies, breathing masks, Narcan, that sort of thing. They will bring it to the leader, and they ensure that only essential staff are in the immediate area. L is the leader. The leader is the person that's going to stay with the person in crisis and performs life-saving procedures as directed. They are the ones that are going to model calmness for other people involved and rely on their team to fulfill the other duties that need to be done during a medical emergency. And finally, we have M. M is the milieu manager. This person directs other people away from the situation. They make sure other people receiving services are safe. They're going to ensure that there's clear access to the residents. So if there's snow, ice, they're going to quickly try to get that gone from there to, you know, not prevent emergency personnel from arriving on site and being able to respond. So they're going to be the ones making sure that the environment is safe and EMS can respond. A couple things to note here. We do have performing life-saving procedures as directed in each of these different roles, because we know, like, for example, completing CPR is exhausting. So staff might have to tap out and have somebody else come in. So it is, you know, it will be the responsibility of everyone potentially to be performing those life-saving procedures. We also recognize that this would be, you know, with 4 different assignments here, we recognize that would be an ideal staffing pattern, but many programs are not lucky enough to have that many staff on shift at any given time. So we do also encourage agencies to review tasks here that could be combined to make sure that they're still all, you know, all the functions and tasks are still being accounted for. The next tool we wanted to mention here, and then we're going to take a break, this is the hierarchy of needs that I mentioned. We call it the medical emergency guidelines at a glance. You can see the different areas. Anything that's in red would be things that we would expect an immediate call to 911. So you see things on there like bleeding heavily, broken bones, chest pain, suspected overdose, those kinds of things. Things in orange are things to go, you know, situations that may require going to the emergency department. Those are things like burns with skin damage, falls, but maybe the person gets up on their own, and, you know, fewer types of situations there. And then in yellow, we have things that can wait. Either you can wait until you get a call from or guidance from an RN, or you can wait until you can call the person's physician. But those are things like, you know, maybe a fall with no injury, maybe a rash, things that don't require immediate medical intervention.
Kim, before we go to break, we've gotten a couple questions
Okay, let's do
for
it.
you. One person wanted to know if we had any suggestions for building relationships with maybe the, local EMT or police. Noted that sometimes police are reluctant to come to a provider agency if they've been called a lot. I would just say that if someone's calling 911 about a medical emergency and that's the response that you're getting, you've got a bigger problem. I don't know that we can help you with that. But I don't know if you had any suggestions, Kim. I know some providers will have open houses for their local precinct. They will reach out to the police, make sure they know the kinds of services they're providing. And I'm sure you've run across other examples.
Yeah, we've run into programs that have invited, law enforcement in or emergency personnel in without an emergency, so that they can get a sense of, the layout of the program, the staff that are there, and the type of people that are receiving services there. I think that's one thing that we've seen be pretty effective. I know when I worked in the field, our administration did a lot of outreach to our local law enforcement. And when I worked in the field, local law enforcement did try to send the same officers when they could to the program, so that there was some familiarity there. So that might be something for agencies who do have an existing relationship with law enforcement to talk about. Maybe there's one officer who's really good with the people that are receiving services. So that might be something to say, hey, we really like it when Officer Smith responds. He's really good with our people. Could that be something that we could try to do, or could he maybe work with some other staff to train them on things?
Thank you. And then there was another question. Do you recommend that Narcan should be available even in places where, there's not a known suspected opioid abuse going on?
Absolutely. I think, unfortunately, over the last 10 years or so, the opioid crisis has really, really just gotten larger, and it continues to grow, especially with the use of fentanyl to make our drugs stronger. So I think that even if you don't have people who you think are using, or they don't have a history of using, fentanyl can be mixed in with other drugs too, and that Narcan access is really important in those situations. We do see people overdose on, cocaine that had fentanyl in it, or even marijuana. Fentanyl can be laced in there. So we definitely recommend having that available if you're providing services to people. Unfortunately, it's the reality of
Yep.
things right now.
Always easier to be prepared.
Yep.
Can you talk a little bit more about what is included in the grab and go binder?
Yep, absolutely. So the grab and go binders, things like what you would be telling EMS about a person receiving services, so that the EMS can provide appropriate medical care. So any sort of medications that the person takes, if possible, if there's a way to let them know whether or not they received their medications today, they received their medications an hour ago, because that can make a difference in terms of how EMS chooses to intervene. Any sort of medical diagnosis, psychiatric diagnosis, any behaviors, could also be listed there, so that people that, EMS knows what to expect when dealing with a person. Even things like if there's challenges with, different language being spoken, or a preference of a male staff or a female staff, those kinds of things that can be helpful. Having a male staff might not make a huge difference in terms of saving somebody's life, but if the person's more comfortable with men and we're able to provide that sort of support, we definitely would encourage those types of things. So if there's personal preferences like that, family contact information or any emergency contact information, if the person has a DNR, a do not resuscitate order, or DNI order, we'd want that at least listed on that, quick reference guide. Trying to think what else. Generally speaking, those are the things that we would expect to see.
Great, thanks. And so it's for each individual. And then last, I think I've got this question right, but so when you talk about training per diem staff, or, trainings that need to be provided for staff, even if a person is, just only there a couple days a month, are you saying that person should be trained, as part of a corrective action plan?
Yes. And the reason is, let's say that that person works twice a month, and those 2 times happen to be when there's an emergency or happens to be when there's something that they have to respond to. We want to make sure that they are equipped in the same way as other staff to handle those sorts of situations. Really, right now, I think a lot of agencies are relying on the use of per diem staff to fill those vacancies and to allow for their regular staff to take a break or, get a day off here and there. So I think really treating per diem staff like you would treat any staff is really important, and giving them that information is going to be vital.
Thank you, Kim. That's the last question that I have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we are going to be taking a 10-minute break. So we will see everyone in 10 minutes. When we come back, I'm going to be giving you an overview of professional boundaries and discussing some resources. Welcome back, everyone. We hope that you enjoyed that very calm music and scene. We did. So we are going to jump in with discussing what are professional boundaries and why they are important. And first, we just want to review the resources that we have already discussed. So I showed you on our website the spotlight on prevention, where you can get all the toolkits, including the 2 that Kim referred us to. We have the interactive training on professional boundaries. I'm actually going to show you 3 scenarios from the interactive training. And we also have the facilitator's guide for interactive training for professional boundaries. I'm just curious, if you could just type a yes or no in the chat, how many of you have either taken the professional boundaries online training or you yourself facilitated that professional boundaries training? Someone took the training, a couple facilitated. Okay, yeses and nos. The majority of people have not. So I would really suggest, I know a lot of agencies are using this as kind of a refresher to talk about the importance of professional boundaries. And I'll give you more about that, how that training is intended to be delivered a little bit later on. So what do we talk about when we talk about the word boundaries? Well, boundaries serve to protect us. So if you think of a baby at the bottom of the stairs and there is a gate there, that gate is protecting that baby from crawling up the stairs and potentially falling down. So think of a boundary, it's there to protect us, and it prevents us from crossing into other people's boundaries, because we all have our own set of boundaries. And when we add the word professional, that's a reminder that you have a specific role to maintain professional boundaries in your workplace. So your professional boundaries could be guided by your agency standards, could be the ethics of your profession, and it's also standards by the Justice Center Code of Conduct. And what it does is it provides a clear understanding of your roles and your responsibility, and ultimately it allows the relationship you have with the people receiving services to be a therapeutic one. So by having professional boundaries, you're actually going to increase those relationships. So why are boundaries important? Well, your primary role is to promote the health and safety of individuals receiving services. So that's why you may have visitors sign in and out of a program. We want to protect the people in our care. And we also, professional boundaries also empower people's growth, their independence, and personal rights. So if you have an individual who someone is always speaking for them, you can support that individual by speaking for themselves. You set a healthy boundaries. Now you're going to be a role model for helping people build skills that they need and setting healthy limits. So what it really does is protects you from engaging in inappropriate relationships if you have professional boundaries. And if you have professional boundaries at work, you're going to be in that therapeutic relationship with the people that you are supporting, and you're going to have greater job satisfaction because of that. So the risk of unprofessional boundaries, unfortunately, it could lead to abuse, neglect, or mistreatment. You could compromise that therapeutic relationship because you don't have professional boundaries. And if you cross some boundaries, it could be traumatizing or re-traumatizing to the people in your care. And it really removes that opportunity to learn and develop your own boundaries and then how you interact with other people. And it could have legal consequences for staff. So the continuum of service, continuum of professional behavior, we look at this as a guide. So on the left, you have under involvement. On the right, you have over involvement, and then that therapeutic relationship is in the middle. So when we're talking about under involvement, it's not getting to know the people that you support, not knowing their needs and wants, maybe not even looking at their treatment plan. You're under involved. You're not that much involved with what's going on. The over involvement, if you're overly involved with someone that you're supporting, that's when it could lead to sexual abuse or physical abuse. What we really want, the goal is that therapeutic relationship. So actions are in line with your agency's policies, the code of conduct, and you always need to be asking yourself, were my actions in the best interest of the person that I am supporting? So we're always going to go back to that. So we're going to review physical boundaries, interpersonal boundaries, and psychological boundaries. And we're going to start with physical boundaries first, just because they're the most concrete. So physical boundaries, that can deal with touch. So how, when, and where we touch others, but how, when, and where others touch us. So even before the pandemic, was it okay to hug the people that you support? Was it okay to give them a high five? What was your agency policy and procedure around touching? Physical boundaries also have to do with personal space. So the distance between one another when people are talking. So I teach my kids that this is my bubble and that is your bubble. A lot of times my older one will come in and I say, nope, you're in my bubble. For him, it doesn't matter if he's talking to me this close. For me, that is my personal space. And I know that that's a boundary of mine. So I'm going to have to tell people about that. Personal property could be someone's belongings, their clothing, could even be their wheelchair when we talk about personal property. Privacy in terms of physical boundaries, that's how you maintain your privacy in your home. So are you one of those people that never lock your doors when you leave the house? Or are you the type of person that locks your doors every time? So physical boundaries, I think, is the most concrete. So what I'm going to do is pull up a scenario for people receiving services at OPWDD, and then we're going to take a look at that one. So the point of the professional boundaries, as I said, interactive training is you're going to go through what some of these definitions are, what physical boundaries mean, what interpersonal boundaries mean, and then depending on the agency where people are receiving services, you're going to click on that agency. It is going to bring up a different scenario. So this is the one around physical boundaries related to people who are in receiving services from OPWDD. So this is entitled Good Morning Baby. Rosie is an occupational therapist who recently moved to the US and works at a day habilitation program. Bernie arrives and is greeted by Rosie with, "Good morning, baby," and a hug. Bernie feels uncomfortable, but he keeps quiet. When leaving, Rosie escorts Bernie out and kisses him on the cheek and says, "Buenas noches, mi amor." Bernie reported the interaction to the residence manager. When it was addressed with Rosie by her supervisor, Rosie defended her action, saying that in her culture, showing off affection means you care about the other person, and that's how she's always acted. So at this point, if you're facilitating the training, we have questions to prompt you for the discussion. But the one that I want you guys to type in the chat was the first one that we discuss after every scenario is what boundaries were crossed. So after reading that, you can just type in the chat, what boundaries do you think were crossed? Personal space, kissing. Someone wrote all of them, kissing, mi amor. The greeting, the physical, the touch, Yeah, you guys got it. And if I was facilitating this or someone else was facilitating, there's a bunch of different questions. So does Bernie want to be hugged and called baby? And if he does, is that in the best interest of Bernie? And then you would have a discussion around it. Another question could be, does Rosie hugging people that she supports means that she cares about the staff more than others who do not hug? So it's a great opportunity to stop the training and have a discussion. We have questions in there for you to ask, but you can also, just not make up. You can also ask questions that are more important and pertinent to you. I am going to bring the PowerPoint back up. Okay, interpersonal boundaries. So when we think about interpersonal boundaries, what do we think of? Well, first of all, is topics of conversation. So I think we need to be mindful if the person receiving services can hear your conversation, whether that is a confidential conversation that you're having with another colleague, or maybe you're sharing your political views. Some degree of self-disclosure obviously may be helpful to enrich that relationship that you have, but you always need to ask, is this in the best interest of the person receiving services? Would it be okay if this individual overhears my conversation? So time and place. Would it be appropriate if I said to Kim, who I work with, hey Kim, across the room, did Nikos take his Depakote today? Obviously, that is inappropriate. It's a violation of confidentiality for Kim. There is a time and a place to have that appropriate conversation. Self-presentation, when we're talking about interpersonal boundaries, goes to a person's attire, what they're wearing, could be their tone of voice or their body language. Body language is actually the biggest component of communication. So we need to watch how we're presenting ourselves when we're interacting with people that we support. So are we leaning in and making eye contact? Are we nodding our head? Are we engaging in a dialogue? Or are we turned around and doing something else and sort of listening? So this is all about how we present ourselves. And then social media. Is it okay to connect with a person receiving services in your program on Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter? I don't know, is it? Curious, how many of you can put yes or no in the chat, do you have a social media policy? Oh, good. A lot of people are saying yes. Excellent. Excellent. So you don't even have to tell someone that awkward conversation, well, I can't really be friends with you. Just say it's an agency policy. I'm sorry, I can't really be friends with you on Facebook or Twitter. So I'm going to bring up an example of people receiving services through OMH, a scenario around interpersonal boundaries. This out of the way. This one is entitled Our Little Secret. Mia is a 24-year-old woman receiving treatment in an inpatient psychiatric facility. Riley, a mental health counselor at the facility, went to college with Mia, and they are friends on Instagram. Riley posts a picture on Instagram from a party. Mia tells him that he looks hot in the picture. Riley is worried if he blocks Mia on Instagram that she will be upset. He asks her not to tell anyone about their Instagram connection. Later that day, when Riley sees Mia pocket money that someone else left on the table in the rec room, she reminds Riley of their secret. So type in the chat what boundaries were crossed in this specific scenario. Personal boundaries and professional. If I'm facilitating this, I might ask, what could Riley have done differently? So what could Riley have done differently in this particular scenario? Someone wrote Instagram, concealing of it all. He puts the responsibility of the boundary on her, being truthful. It's a conflict for Riley to be on the treatment team. Yeah, these are all discussions that you can have. So we have found that people who's given us feedback from this, they really like certain times in the training that they can pause and have a discussion around this. Yeah, so what boundaries were crossed, what could have Riley done differently, are all things that would be appropriate for this scenario. I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint. And the last boundary that we want to discuss is psychological boundaries. So psychological boundaries, we are all responsible for our own thoughts and feelings, right? However, those thoughts and feelings can be triggered. So let's say a person receiving services was aggressive, or they were overtly sexual, or you were engaging in a power struggle, or they were disrespectful. This can obviously be a trigger for you. So I just want you to think, you don't have to share it in the chat if you don't want. Just think on a daily basis, what are your triggers? So if you're interacting with someone and they do blank, that makes you angry or frustrated or whatever it is. Just think about what your own triggers are. So it's important to be aware of what those triggers are, to take a deep breath, and as a person that is exhibiting good boundaries, we know that it's not our job to take that to heart and recognize that their behavior is not a reflection on us. So what we need to do is identify our triggers, and then instead of reacting, what else could you do? Put it in the chat for me. If you're in a situation where someone triggers you, what could you do? Take a break, ask for help, tap out, walk away, swap out with another staff, remove yourself. Absolutely. Talk to your supervisor. Yeah, so that's why it's really important to be aware of those triggers. So when they happen, you know, and you have a plan to call your supervisor, take a break. If you can, maybe remove yourself from the situation. So I'm going to show a last scenario around psychological boundaries, and this one is for individuals receiving services from Oasis. And this one is called Just My Type. So Libby recently began working at an inpatient substance abuse program. One of the young men receiving services, Antonio, reminds Libby of a guy she had a crush on in college. And after working with Antonio for several months, she finds herself really looking forward to seeing him. While assisting Antonio, she has remarked about his great smile and said that she can tell he works out by the shape he's in. At the end of the conversation this week, she tells him he is just her type of guy. So in the chat, tell me what boundaries were crossed and what could have been done differently in this situation. So what boundaries were crossed in that scenario, and maybe what could have been done differently? Inappropriate sexual boundaries, psychological, trust, professional, should not have continued to work with him. She should have never provided services to Antonio. She should have recused herself. Yes, absolutely. All wonderful answers coming in. So we really encourage you to take a look at that professional boundaries training. Like I showed you on the website, it comes with a facilitator guide. So you don't have to think, oh, should I pause here and ask a question? What should I ask here? It's all in that facilitator guide, when you should pause, when should you ask questions. And then there's also a participant guide, so the participants have the information they need, and there's also space for them to write and take notes and answer questions. Okay, we are going to put up a poll, and it's a very simple poll. We don't want to make anything confusing here. It is basically a yes/no question. So the poll is, do you practice daily self-care? And it's just a yes or no question. Do you practice daily self-care? Okay, Jean, can we see the results? Excellent. 81% of you said yes, that is outstanding. 19% of you said no. So when we talk about self-care strategy helps us maintain psychological boundaries, and it benefits us in our professional and our personal life. Someone told me the other day, self-care is the opposite of being selfish, and I couldn't agree more. When you practice self-care, you are more present, you are calm, you have more patience, more energy. So when you're feeling overwhelmed or stressed, or someone does trigger you, you can do things like you guys said in the chat: take a walk, tap out, take a break. Maybe it's not during the day, but it's maybe before you get to work or after work. Maybe you do some deep breathing. Maybe you do meditation or working out or stretching. But self-care is really important. We all know that you have a very complex job, and I think the more self-care you do, you can become more present and therefore have a better relationship with the people that you're supporting. Just throw in the chat if there's anything else that you do in terms of self-care that I did not mention. Someone put self-care could even be a nice coffee from Starbucks, a mocha latte with extra phone. Absolutely. It could be anything that brings you joy and calms you. Yoga, reading and coffee, positive self-talk, music, playing with my dog. I love that. Visiting with my grandchildren, a bath bomb, breathing deeply, daily prayers, a few extra minutes in the hot shower, FaceTiming my grandson, spa treatment. I wish I could do that every day. Excellent. So you guys have some great ways of how you're taking care of yourself. We just encourage to, if you can, try to make it a daily practice. So Colleen is going to take us through the last, I'm sorry, I just called you Colleen. Kim is going to take us through the last section, which is challenges to maintaining professional boundaries.
I just have one quick question before we go on, and that is, do you recommend, the maintaining professional boundaries, as well as potentially other training for students who may be working in provider agencies and volunteers who are working with people receiving services? What's your stance on training them?
I would say professional boundaries, absolutely. I think everyone can learn more about professional boundaries. It will probably help them in their personal lives as well. We have other trainings on our website. We have one around mandated reporters. So if they're, want to eventually be in this field, we have a training around who is a mandated reporter, how to report to the Justice Center. And I would also suggest the interactive code of conduct training. It's just going to give you a better idea of the provisions in the code of conduct and what we expect people in the field to kind of follow as a guide.
I would go even further and say any student or volunteer that you have that is regularly interacting with people receiving services, they should get the same kinds of training that you're providing your other staff about dealing with people receiving services.
Thanks, Devin.
Okay, so, in the beginning, I mentioned how everybody was really fortunate to only have to remember one name, and my co-presenter forgot my name. I mean, I don't know if it's the end of the day or what here, but
I apologize, Kim. I don't know where that came from.
we're going to wrap up anyways, and with challenges to maintaining professional boundaries. So, what are some challenges to maintaining professional boundaries? When we're talking about this, what do we mean, right? First, we see here vicarious trauma and trauma triggers. We know from working in the field and from research that's been done that pretty much everybody that you encounter has experienced some sort of trauma in their life. It's easy to understand then when we're working with people receiving services how you could bond with that person based on that shared sort of trauma. So, that can be one challenge in terms of providing or making sure that you're maintaining professional boundaries, so you're relating to the person on a pretty deep level in that way. Some other challenges we have here, and I'm going to just lump these together because I think it's important to mention, we understand that there's so many competing priorities and programs. We recognize that there's a staffing crisis right now. We get how easy it is to put aside, really providing that hour weekly supervision to staff, for instance. But it's so important to help overcome some of these challenges to be doing these things. So inadequate training, not doing that in-person training that we mentioned before, not providing ongoing support and supervision, those unclear policies and unclear guidance. Those are some challenges. So, we can't emphasize enough the importance of having well-written, clearly written, and easily accessible policies for staff to be able to refer to. You can go ahead, Kim. When we're talking about red flags, these are, I think, pretty easy to identify. So some red flags are, when you see somebody, a staff person flirting, or even a person receiving services flirting with the staff, that could be a red flag. Keeping secrets with the person receiving services, one thing that you might not think would necessarily be crossing a professional boundary is, like, say you have a staff person who got terminated from your program, and you have a good relationship with a person receiving services, and they ask about the person. You say, "Oh, Kim got terminated." Now I've given this person information that they shouldn't have been privy to, and that opens up the door for other types of violations to occur. So something that seems pretty innocuous could potentially lead to crossing those boundaries. And then, of course, intimate or personal issues with the person receiving services is certainly a red flag. Again, we talked about social media. This is something that we can't emphasize enough. Having those connections on social media can really create a slew of problems. I can say, from looking at Justice Center investigations, one of the pieces of evidence that we often see are those logs of Facebook messages, Instagram messages. So making sure that agencies have policies written that describe social media expectations. I was super stoked when I saw all the people say yes, that their agency did have a policy specific to social media. I think it's so important. Again, this is letting, when people are connecting on social media, it's letting people receiving services potentially see another side of you, and then also having access to you to contact you at any time. So definitely connections on social media is absolutely a red flag. Showing favoritism towards a specific person. When I worked in the field, I had my favorite clients, and then I had clients that I'm like, oh gosh, I really hope this person is okay today. I don't want to deal with them. I think recognizing those things, as Kim had mentioned, and really preparing yourself for the day is super important in these cases. And, even if you have your favorite client, not showing favoritism towards that person, talk with your supervisor. I think in one of the scenarios, we talked about how, I don't remember the individual's name, but I think it was Antonio had reminded the counselor of, somebody that she had a crush on in college, and physically thought that he looked like this person. And so I think acknowledging those sorts of things that's a really important first step there, to say, you know what, something feels a little off with how I'm feeling about this person. And having an agency culture that supports that sort of discussion is super, super important. Other red flags: joking, sarcasm, or horseplay. Maintaining a line of professional behavior is important. And when you're making jokes or being sarcastic or engaging in horseplay with people, it really does cross the line, or could cross the line. So definitely red flags to keep an eye out for. And then absolutely meeting a person receiving services in non-service settings. It might seem innocent. It might seem like, hey, this person's struggling. They want me to meet them for a cup of coffee. That opens up, again, a door for other types of situations that you're probably not going to be prepared to handle and nor should you be prepared to handle, because meeting that person in the non-service setting isn't appropriate. So again, another red flag to keep an eye out for. How to support professional boundaries, training and coaching staff on boundaries. Again, we have this training available. Absolutely use it. Staff meetings, onboarding, orientation, during supervision. I mentioned the mock drills in terms of responding to medical emergencies, and I always give this example of a time when I thought I would feel empowered to speak up, and I didn't necessarily. I was grabbed when I was at a restaurant a few years ago, and it took my friend saying, "Hey, wait a second, don't touch my friend. Why did you just do that?" for me to say, "Oh yeah, don't do that to me." And so I think practicing those scenarios with staff, how to respond when a client says, "Hey, I think you're really hot," or "You remind me of Antonio," or "You remind me of my college boyfriend." Being able to work through those scenarios with staff and helping them to practice on how to respond, I think is super, super important. So definitely training and coaching staff on those things, can't emphasize that enough. Understanding individual treatment plans, needs, and triggers. Training and refreshing staff on the crisis management plan. It's super easy to get into the flow of, daily operations of a program and forget that, how you're supposed to be interacting with somebody in crisis, is a little bit different than how you have been doing it. So definitely refresher trainings on those sorts of things, very critical to making sure, or to helping to ensure that professional boundaries are maintained. And then one thing that we always emphasize is spend time in the milieu to observe and understand what's going on. One thing that I always encourage administration at agencies to do is go visit your programs. You are empowered as the people to make changes to policies, to model that good behavior for staff. So go to your programs, take a look around, spend a little bit of time there and see what's going on. It'll really help you to understand some of those risk factors, and how, maybe speaking to staff or people receiving services can help you to understand ways that you can address those things. And that's it.
And there are not any more questions. So thank you, Kim and Kim. And thank you to everybody who participated. Great participation, and thanks for your interest. Give a couple more minutes, see if there's anything else.
And you will be receiving an email with an evaluation link. We really appreciate your feedback. As Davin said at the beginning, we want to make sure that we can even improve on this. So we really appreciate your feedback on that. And thank you guys very much for your participation. It was wonderful spending the last couple of hours with you.